In the course of her lifetime, Edith Stein lived as a Jew, as an atheist, and as a Catholic. And I think in some ways, she represents one of the best of all three of those. Edith Stein was born in the 1890s in Poland. Eventually, she was living in Germany for a long time. She was born to a very faithful Jewish family. And so she admired her mother's Jewish faith, and she admired her mother's faithfulness. However, at a certain point, she decided she was atheist. So as a teenager, she was openly an atheist, and that was going to be the reality that carried her through many, many years. As she entered into her college years, she was studying philosophy, and she was really engaged in this particular kind of philosophy called phenomenology. But she had not changed. She hadn't shaken any of that atheistic thought yet. It was to her the most convincing thing, and she was a woman who loved the intellectual life. As a philosopher, she loved truth, she loved wisdom. And she eventually got her doctorate in philosophy, and she wanted to be a professor. Now, the difficulty she faced, though, was the reality that there were no female professors out there, really. And so, though she would pass the exam to become that professor, she could just never get that job. And so she was in some ways a victim of just sexism. She faced that difficult reality of her time. When she was 30 years old, she picked up the autobiography of Saint Teresa of Avila. And Saint Teresa of Avila is a Carmelite nun. And so she was reading it, and as she finds herself engaging with the thoughts, with the spiritual life of Saint Teresa, she finds herself more and more drawn to God, more and more drawn to the Catholic faith. And so within a short amount of time, she actually decides to receive baptism, and she starts really forming her heart and her mind in the Catholic way of life, and the Catholic thinking in particular. She came to really enjoy St. Thomas Aquinas and Duns Scotus, two of these Catholic philosophers, and she started to try to find ways of bringing together the philosophical thought that she had been trained in now with her Catholic faith. While she could not be a professor, she became a Catholic school teacher, and eventually she had to stop teaching because there was a new law that the Nazis had instituted that you had to have a certificate of Arianism in order to be a teacher. She couldn't present that because she was Jewish blood, and so she stopped teaching, and she finally pursued what was a dream of hers, to become a discalced Carmelite nun, which means she lived in a cloister. She took the name of Sister Theresa Benedicta of the Cross, and she lived in a convent in Cologne, Germany. Eventually, it was becoming very clear that her life might be at stake, as she was a Jew, though living as a Catholic. And so they made the decision to move her from the convent in Cologne, Germany, off to the Netherlands, in the hopes the Netherlands would be safer. And it was safer for a time. Eventually, though, the Nazis invaded the Netherlands, and at that time, she started to prepare herself for what she presumed would eventually become time in a concentration camp. So she started in the convent to make sure that she was practicing hunger and being in the cold. After a couple of years of the Nazi occupation of the Netherlands, the Dutch bishops released a statement condemning Nazi racism. And while that was a bold thing for them to do, the Nazis retaliated by arresting Jewish converts to Catholicism. So this included Sister Theresa Benedicta of the Cross, Edith Stein, and her sister, who had also become a nun. The two of them were arrested and were shipped off to Auschwitz. And in the midst of that transition, she encountered a Dutch official who had the ability to help her escape. He was just so amazed by her faith, by her sense of calm in the midst of her difficulties, and he wanted to do what he could to try to help her. And her response was, "No, thank you." She said that she wished to share in the fate of her brothers and sisters. So she was taken to Auschwitz, and a week later, she was killed in the gas chambers. We venerate her as a Catholic martyr, though of course she's in some ways a Jewish martyr. She was dying with her brothers and sisters. We see her as a Catholic martyr because the reason why she and her brothers and sisters were rounded up and taken to Auschwitz was because of Catholic moral teaching on racism and on Nazism. It was because those bishops had spoken up that she was arrested and killed. We can pray for the intercession of Edith Stein for our world for a few reasons. First of all, we can pray for the conversion of our culture when it comes to the intellectual life. She loved the intellectual life. She loved wisdom. And in some ways, our culture is kind of lost in appreciation for the truth. And we've lost an appreciation for respectful, authentic dialogue with one another. So Edith Stein could pray for us for a recovery of those things in our culture. She could also pray for a healing in our nation and in our world when it comes to the issues of sexism and racism. Obviously, she experienced both of those things. They are real, genuine experiences in the depths of her heart. She knows the pain of those things, and she could pray for healing for us for those things. But I also think that we should be asking Edith Stein to pray for us, that we would have courage like her to choose solidarity with those who suffer. Sometimes I think we can feel sympathy for those who suffer. We can feel bad for them and maybe pray for them, but it's a whole different thing to choose to stand with them, to choose to suffer with them, and maybe even to go to death with them. So today, we ask for Edith Stein, St. Theresa Benedicta, to pray for healing of our world in so many ways. Saint Theresa Benedicta of the Cross, pray for us.